続きまして、本日
Now, we would like to move on to the final program for today, Top Leader Session. Now, I would like to ask Ms. Hiroko Kuniya, an anchor, to moderate the session. Kuniya-san, please take the floor. So this is going to be the final program for today, Top Leader Session. So the youth sessions that we just heard, Climate Action Summit, SD Summit, I covered in New York. What we need to target at is not 2 degrees, but 1.5 degree. And the world changed gears towards that, and that is a result of movement by the young people, including Greta. But to bring changes and to make the power to change things is held by businesses as well as leaders of the government as well as leaders of municipalities. So how are the leaders recognizing the current situation? With what kind of strategies are they going to bring changes? The words of the leaders, I think, are extremely important. I get to talk with people in the businesses quite often, people who are in charge of sustainability. I'm sure that many of you belong to such offices or departments. People say that, Kuniya-san, what you just told me, please tell that to my president. Or please say that to our director. So people who are working in the field are not feeling a little bit, not feeling really comfortable in their respective organizations. So in New York in September, I heard the words of the leaders. Prime Minister Frederiksen of Denmark. Denmark committed that they're going to realize the decarbonization by 70%. And she said that she has no answer how they can achieve 70% reduction. And if anyone has an answer, a 70% reduction target is too low as a target. That is what she said, which showed her commitment as a leader. And the president of Costa Rica has achieved almost 100% renewable energy. President of Costa Rica later, President said that I don't want my children or my grandchildren to say that, did you really do your best, grandma or grandfather or mother or father? And I would like to share with you another word mentioned by the governor Newsom of California. There is a bushfire in California, and it is suffering from a major drought. It suffered from a major drought in last year, according to the governor. The actions taken against the climate change is directly linked with the survival of people, our values, our will. And this is related to the question of who we are as human beings. This question of the governor and the voices of the young people, including Greta, these two very important questions that were raised, and we need to start running towards the target of zero emission by 2050. The leaders who are going to come up on stage, what kind of words are they going to use to explain the strategy of the company and how they're going to share with us their passion? And the leaders of the municipalities, how are they going to design the strategy for their community to achieve the safe community? Now, I would like to invite the leaders to the stage. Now I would like to start the top leaders session. So that was a rather serious start. I believe I probably applied too much pressure on the speakers, but the words of the leaders, and while people are working extremely hard in the field, how do you see the current situation and what kind of risks do you see? What kind of sense of crisis do you have while you run the business or run the municipality? That is my first question. I don't care about the order. Who would like to volunteer to speak first? I am mayor of Otsu City in Shiga Prefecture. I would like to talk about what's happening in the local community. Last year it was extremely hot. And in other cities, elementary school students died from heat strokes. People are taking actions against heat waves or heat strokes. If there is an index provided by the ministry, and if it's above that index, school students are not able to engage themselves in different activities. And before the summer holidays, there's been a number of days where things were above the threshold. And in those cases, sports days were cancelled and no swimming school activities. So looking back on my childhood, during the summer holidays, I was looking forward always to play outside. But today, even before the summer holidays, children were not able to go outside to play. And their events in the community have changed quite significantly. Summer festivals are held by communities, but because of the heat stroke issue, many of those festivals were cancelled. So this year, people decided to change the schedule for the festivals, and also many local communities decided to cancel the festivals. So there's been a significant change to the lives of people in the community as well as those of the children. In the council, City Council of Kyoto reached a resolution yesterday, very much like an emergency declaration. And Hiki City of Nagasaki Prefecture, Kamakura City have also made saying that they're going to make an emergency declaration as well. So the heat that may risk your lives, and there are a lot of natural disasters as well. So now that we are not able to lead normal lives, what kind of impact do they have on business? What kind of sense of crisis do you have? Who would like to speak next? Ichikawa-san.
My name is Ichikawa from Sumitomo Forestry. As was mentioned, the actual climate change is being acutely felt by our company. Into this year, typhoon number 15, 19, and 21. So looking at houses, so much damage has been wrought on houses. And looking at the magnitude geographically, the area that's been affected by typhoons is greater than that affected by Great East Japan earthquake. 120,000 households were affected by flooding and windstorm, rainstorm, roof falling, holes born in the walls, so unprecedented damage. Last year, western part of Japan was hit by a strong wind. So whenever such damage happens, we have to make inquiries to our customers who have houses, but we can't even reach them, contact them. And so conventional approaches are not enough. And ever since Industrial Revolution, there's already a rise in temperature of 1 degree. And this is what we're seeing. So if the temperature is going to go on to rise 2-3 degrees, what's going to happen? We have to be serious.
So the risk of fire in the forest as well, increased risk. Can I continue?
And let me talk about what's happening overseas. In Indonesia and Malaysia, there's haze. Because of forest fire, there's smoke and haze generated. That has become a huge issue. And that is because of excessive deforestation, cutting of the trees, and because of dryness and drought in forests that's causing this. And it's spreading in an unprecedented magnitude. We're engaged in forestry business, so climate change is an immediate threat to us.
And productivity of working outside is going to deteriorate, according to a report issued by ILO. Now, I would like to ask David Seimaya-san from Mitsui Sumitomo Trust Asset Management. He's a chairman.
Seimaya, I will speak.
This is Seimaya.
So if you can. There are 2 points I'd like to make. One is from a personal perspective on climate change. I grew up in Florida, in a place called Miami Beach, and I moved there in 1963, where we never had a problem in the fall or the spring with a full moon, but now every year we have water coming in from the ocean and flooding the area on a regular basis. I first came to Japan in 1978 as a student and have lived on and off here for 23 years. I had a gap of 9 years living in London and returned, and every summer, every year, it seems to get hotter and hotter. We used to have typhoons here, but not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 at a time. And the typhoons and hurricanes are getting larger and larger and larger. From an investment perspective, we own in our index funds every listed company in Japan, as well as we manage assets globally. And the risks that we are seeing, there are some obvious ones like insurance companies, who in Japan now have had the largest payouts, the largest damage and payouts ever. The insurance industry will have to change, but in addition to that, banking. We're lending money to individuals around the world who are living on the ocean front, who are living on rivers, who are living on lakes, and I'm sorry for all the individuals that were in harm's way in Japan in the last 2 months. It's really a tragedy. But even banking has to consider how to think about mortgages, how to think about the change. And this is a risk that the finance industry hasn't thought about in the past, and we really seriously now have to think about it and move forward on it.
So in Florida, where you grew up, there's been an increase in the sea level. You shared with us your personal experiences. And from the perspective of investors, there's been increased risk in different areas. And lastly, last but not least, you are in the area of finance as well as in retail. How do you see the crisis? Thank you. The word as a top executive. That has been the way I was invited, a strong pressure. Why do our company engage in dealing with global warming and climate? But before that, about my personal situation, why was I motivated to be very serious, if I may? I want to talk about my personal feeling. That is because children guided me. I do have 2 children. As I observe what the kids are talking, as I talk with the children, I think I have started to feel this way. A few years ago, this is what happened. My child was in the primary school. I was invited to class to observe the class. It was the Japanese language, kokugo. Unique. Children engaged in a panel discussion, just like what we are doing right now. Little children in primary school, but they did something like a panel discussion. What was the topic? About our future. That was the topic of the kids' panel. I was very interested. Then they were smiling. Kids were smiling, and they said something like that. When we become adults, because of global warming, the environment would have been destructed. I think the human will be extinct. I think there will be a nuclear war. And there will be no earth. I think there will be no man alive. That was what the kids were saying. I mean, they looked okay. They were talking very casually, boys and girls. There were 7 or 8 kids on the panel. But I was surprised that there was no positive image and vision. Not a single kid described a bright future for them. I was so shocked because compared to when I was a child, this was a horrible difference. I was so shocked. It struck me. Another anecdote related to children, as I mentioned, that's Greta Thunberg of Sweden. I think it was last year. I mean, she appeared on the world stage and now she has become a leader of climate. In fact, she is advocating all the young and the children of the world. When I noticed the kids on the panel discussion in the classroom, they have now become 16 years old, the same age as Greta, I realized all of a sudden. I recalled the time when I visited the classroom. So I had felt that Greta and the kids that I met in the classroom, they're exactly the same. They are identical for me. The other day, Greta delivered a speech at the United Nations. In Japan, it attracted a huge attention. I think I'm glad she attracted attention, but at the same time, she exposed a strong anger. It was shocking indeed. There were some negative reactions as well because of her strong words. What I observed was the panel discussion, the little kid said the human beings would all be killed and they have gone extinct. Maybe, although they spoke casually, they may have been frightened and they may have been anxious, but I don't know why, but those little children, because they were talking in front of the teachers, in front of mothers and fathers, they unconsciously did not describe their feeling, but I thought that they were anxious and angry as much as Greta. They were so innocent, trying to be so considerate to the adults. I felt so painful. Already the future of the child, in particular the bright future, is already eroded. We, in the adult generation, unless we transform our behavior, the future days of our children will be lost day by day. The fear, the sense of crisis, the future of our children getting shorter day by day. We have a moral responsibility. Ever since the Industrial Revolution, we need to think about the way we live, our lifestyles, the work, the business industries will have to be changed. Or otherwise, literally, the future of our children will be eroded, eliminated. That is what drives me and ourselves.
Share the fear that I feel. Greta mentioned in her speech that she wanted adults to take actions, sharing her anger. But on the other hand, businesses need to be viable as businesses, and municipalities are facing different restrictions such as budget. And where should we start to accelerate the required change? Zero emission by 2050, and control the temperature increase to 1.5 degree. I spoke with Dr. Lockstrom, and from next year, emission that has been increased need to be reversed to declining trend. And then every year we need to reduce by 6 to 7%. If not, we'll not be able to make it. 6 or 7% reduction every year. It's a huge number, very hard to achieve. But the leaders, as of today, they are losing in the fight against global warming, and the next 10 years is going to be the key. Those are the words that were mentioned in New York. Next 10 years has got to be climate decade. So in that situation, as companies, you need to come up with different strategies. Local governments come up with their own strategies. What will be the main focus? And what are the priorities? And how will you be able to achieve those targets? So what is your main focus, and how are you going to realize the targets?
In our case, it's electricity, power. We have credit card business. We have retail stores, outlet. We have 25 sales store. More than you believe, it needs power. Lighting, air conditioning, and eating and drinking in the retail store is becoming very popular. Then cooking, refrigerating, all of that needs power. Per unit area, the power consumption is twice the amount consumed in factories. Retails are power eaters. In terms of the cost on an annual basis, 30 billion yen power charge. Impossible, prohibitively expensive, the power. But out of our environmental footprint, 80% is because of power consumption, electricity. We have to reduce power or be more efficient. But one difficulty. Our customers, they wanted to buy clothing and pretty goods, but more than ever, they want to eat and drink on our premises. As I mentioned, more power has to be used. Despite our effort of efficiency, the customers demand that they want to consume more power on the premises because they want to sit down and eat and drink. What about power that does not emit CO2? We have to procure. 2 years ago, RE100, we decided to join. And last year, our goal was established. By 2030, we shall be 100% renewable utility. At the moment, we have gone to 23% of renewable in terms of power source. So that's what we are doing more than anything else.
Priority is the procurement of renewables. Okay. Ichikawa-san.
Sumitomo Forestry started off as a business in Dozan, Shikoku. We had a copper mine, and we started off with that business, branching out into a forestry business. When productivity arises in the copper mine, we would cut down on trees in the mountain, and that would cause salt problems, salt accumulation, causing environmental harm. And so we would have to plant trees to reforest. And so that was the starting point of our business. Timber. How can timber be utilized? So that is at the core of our business. We're engaged in sales and distribution, houses as well. Other than houses, non-housing structures we're also branching out into. So timber, as you all know, when trees grow, they absorb CO2 and they emit O2. So that's the nature of trees. So we should try to utilize timber better, expand the market for that. And mountains where there are human interventions, they have to be maintained by human intervention. Otherwise, the forests will deteriorate. Natural mountains and reforested mountains, there's a distinction between the two. That's pretty clear in Japan. So we have to utilize timber, and at the same time, we have to plant trees. How can we create that sustainable cycle? For that to happen, we have to expand the market for timber consumption. At the same time, reforestation, planting trees to promote that. We're also producing seedlings. Once you cut down trees, you have to plant seedlings. And so there's this cycle, and that's where we would like to allocate our management resources. I think it's right person in the right place. In a post-war period where we should have used more timber and wood, we relied on other materials took over. But 2010, government policy changed, and promotion of use of timber and wood for public facilities and buildings. We're seeing increasing number of schools using wood material these days. Those of you who are here, when you were children, you learned that schools are built of non-wood materials, I'm sure. So how can we lead to sustainability based on the business? That's our biggest management challenge.
But then the pace of trees growing is quite slow, but the speed of decarbonization required, that alone, we cannot achieve that speed. Procurement of renewable energy and other strategies. Do you have those strategies?
Well, always talked about power. We're engaged in biomass power generation. How to count CO2 emissions for biomass generation? There's that question, but at least no. It uses wasted material that's left unused. The production cost is zero. CO2 cost is zero. So unused timber and biomass is used for generation. There is so much wood that is left unused and discarded in the mountains. So utilize that to generate power. And zero energy house, we call it ZECH. The houses themselves, the energy consumption in the house is reduced. And another initiative is life cycle carbon minus. From the start of the construction of the house, we look at CO2 emissions. What is good about timber or wood is that it's light in weight. And CO2 cost in producing timber is small. You cut down the plant, you transport, and you process it. So energy consumption is minimal. Although we have not achieved this, life cycle carbon, we want the carbon emission to be negative. So that is what we would like to achieve with various initiatives, including such.
One of the initiatives implemented by Otsushi, actually there are two of them. One of the initiatives implemented by the city, when we rebuild waste incinerator plant, we implement wasted power or put solar panels, power for panel generation on the rooftops. But what is more important than that is to make sure that each individual in the community can take actions. Even if we put solar panels on each of the city building, the number is limited. So we would like to raise the awareness of the city people in the community first. So as I mentioned earlier, As of today, already children are no longer able to play outside during the summer, and all the people know about that. But why is it happening? It's something that we need to communicate to the people in the community. If people have an understanding on that, I'm sure that more people will be involved in these actions. And in Shiga Prefecture, we are not distributing plastic bags free of charge. And city of Otsu, we have been able to reduce the amount of waste by about 10% in the past 5 years. That is as a result of efforts made by individuals to reduce waste. So there is an ongoing climate change. It is already happening. And that is caused by our daily lives. That we need to make sure that all of the people in the community understand that. And as a result, they need to be motivated to change their lifestyles. According to the plan of Otsu City, reduction target by 2030 is higher than the target of the national government. It seems as though that it's not ambitious enough. I think the city should come up with a more of a challenging target, which would result in raising the awareness of the people in the community. Are there any difficulties? We would love to set more of a challenging target, but I think it is very important to set a target to motivate the individuals in the community. As an institutional investor, you do engagements with different companies. I'm sure that you see things differently. The companies, where do they feel the difficulties of decarbonization, or as an investor, because you see things in a different way, you are able to identify, are able to prioritize to realize decarbonization. So from the eyes of an institutional investor, can you tell us your strategy?
So it really is wonderful to be on such an esteemed panel and to have such forward thinkers leading businesses here in Japan. I would say that this may not be representative of all of the 3,000 or 4,000 companies that are listed on the exchanges. Of course, we engage, and engagement, by the way, is, I think, the most important point for an institutional investor. Remember, we're a fiduciary, so the large asset owners that we manage money for have basically told us they have changed their policies, or they are looking for advice on how to invest into a cleaner world. But to the point on impact, of course, our group and the bank has done many things. We have, for example, stopped financing in new coal plants, both here in Japan. But focusing on the portfolio, the companies that we own, I think is really important, and I get back to engagement. We engage here domestically, and we engage abroad. And given my native language is English, and we manage about almost $200 billion of global equities, I've been asked to really focus on engagement abroad. And the difference in response from chief financial officers, CEOs of European firms or European companies that are in our portfolios, and for example, and I don't want to single out any particular country or jurisdiction, but perhaps Asia or even the United States, where it's difficult to get an appointment, it's difficult to meet very senior people, is an example of those locations, those jurisdictions that are really, really engaged and want to move the needle. In fact, we are visited on a regular basis by many of those companies and CFOs who are telling us, without even asking, what they're doing on the carbon side. I like to use two English words, and that's N. They both begin with N. And the approach in discussing, I think you mentioned in your opening speech about talking to the president of the Shacho, what are we going to do about this? And there's one attitude, and I call it, it's a nuisance. Many companies still, their chief executive or senior executives, when they're asked the question, they view it as a nuisance rather than a necessity. And we need to move from nuisance to necessity, from end to end. And the way we approach it is we visit the company, we ask them about their plans, we make suggestions, and we promise them that we're going to come back. And we do come back. And we visit them, and we ask, have they hit their targets and their plans? Why are those plans delayed? And we come back again. And then, because this is very important for companies to transition, you can have an approach where you just exclude the companies, but we have taken the approach, we are really focused on the transition. And then finally, after going and time after time and realizing that there isn't progress, I think it's very important we talk with our clients to go back and then divest and then apply the pressure. Because there needs to be reward. We have companies sitting on this panel that are proactive. And there needs to be the reward for those proactive companies. They need to be able to finance their businesses at a lower level, at a cheaper level. They need to be able to sell their products knowing, with their clients and customers, knowing that they follow a clean future and a clean approach. If there's no reward and there's no penalty, I don't know how we move forward. I'll just leave that with you.
So businesses with high environmental load, and they're making money, they're making profits. And on the other hand, institutional investors are doing engagements, and they are saying things like you should reduce CO2 emission more. And whether you proactively respond to those comments, and or management who think that it's a nuisance, or whether they are able to accept it as a necessity. So I'm sure that many companies are suffering from the similar kind of dilemma. I'm sure that there are conflicts between different functions or departments. Because this business is making money, I'm sure that there are a lot of conflicts. So what is difficult, Ichikawa-san?
Throughout the business operations, how can we rise to the challenge of tackling climate change? That's the question. We have a headache in Indonesia. We have large production plants in Indonesia, and we want to switch over to renewable energies. But unfortunately, there's not enough infrastructure to support purchasing and receiving renewables. It's not competitive yet. So we are trying to achieve RE100, but production activities overseas, how can we change that so that CO2 emissions can be brought down close to zero? Technically, we are struggling. And in terms of the awareness, here in Japan, we can talk like this and we can have people understand, but in overseas, in areas that we are in, people who are engaged in production, they don't really buy in. They may understand theoretically, but they say that they can't come up with a solution for the problem, although they may understand the problem. So it's hard. And in order to spread this globally, we have to do what we can do in Japan. And we have to set the example, be a model, so that our colleagues overseas can follow in suit. And I'm sorry for being lengthy, but We are Sumitomo Forestry as a business. People say they understand. What I tell my employees is we have to do our business, but each and every employee, what kind of approach can we take individually to climate change? We need to think together. So we may understand it in our mind, but we may not translate in what we understand in our day-to-day action, and that includes me. So as corporate objectives, we need to tackle that. That's important. But not only that, we have to translate what we preach in our day-to-day activities.
So CDP, it requires you to do disclosures, and there is an ongoing monitoring by the institutional investors to see if there is an ongoing reduction. And we need to be open, and you need to work on it even faster. So what kind of dilemma does Marie have? What kind of challenges are you facing?
In a certain sense, our approach has to change 180 degrees, lots of challenges and difficulties. But in other words, the difficulties, the homework that we need to complete our homework. Then as a result, it ends up in a certain innovation. In a certain sense, we have to be grateful for this difficult homework. For example, in terms of the renewable energies, within our group, there is a person in charge of buying power because we spend 3 billion yen of utility charges. These persons in our company, they try to purchase the cheapest electricity, collecting estimates from lots of potential suppliers. They work so hard, invested energy to buy cheap power. All of a sudden, we tell them, we are going to buy expensive renewables. Our people get confused. I had to really say sorry. I'm sorry, forgive me. I know I'm saying something 180 degrees different from yesterday, but we now have to purchase different electricity. I apologized, and the persons in charge said, understood. But then it was funny afterwards. This person in charge is the child, and the child had to write an essay about the father's business at school, and the child wrote that the father had to switch to renewable, and the father thinks it very fulfilling, and I am proud of my father who is contributing to the society. And the child received an award for the essay praising his father. Oh my God, it's so fun to do this business. All of a sudden, the entire family was so happy, including the father and the kid who wrote the essay, because they managed to overcome a big hurdle. Now we are up another level, and we are finding it fulfilling. We want to have homeworks. We want difficult homeworks. I think that's the attitude.
But even at the board, don't you have any discussions on willingly taking on challenges?
Any dissent at the board meeting? I mean, yeah, don't go too extreme. I do hear such voices. There is the sustainability board. Let me correct. At the same status as the board meeting, I wanted to set up a sustainability board. Why don't we think a bit more? My idea was not adopted immediately. But a commission is made, so the status is close to the board of directors. We do have external experts on the board, on the commission, on our sustainability commission. I'm wondering how to describe, but I think everybody is supporting me.
But reaching a consensus, of course, in a company, if there is a strong leader, it's possible. But local governments, you have the city council, and you can't really go too extreme. Even if you want to switch gears to decarbonization, I'm sure you face different challenges. What kind of obstacles do you see? The most difficult is whether or not the people are able to accept the inconvenience. For example, plastic bags. I will not take the plastic bottles. We switch to bring your own bottle. That's easy. But if you go one step further, no more cars. No cars are accepted. Switch to EVs. We can study the possibility. But if we do that, without cars, people won't be able to go anywhere. So whether or not the citizens are able to accept the inconvenience is the challenge. It's a difficulty. And to do that, we need to explain the need. If not, we'll not be able to go beyond where we are today. In the local government, SMEs that are doing business in the community, the SMEs in the city, have them participate in RE100 or have them promote decarbonization. How do you think you'll be able to support them? What we have done so far in different ways, we have provided subsidies. So in certain areas we have seen progress, but businesses in the city, there are variations, there are differences in SMEs. Some of them are advanced, others are not doing anything at all. So going forward, the companies may be given awards and provide incentives is something that we would like to do. Semaya-san, do you have anything to say?
Thank you. I was really moved by the discussion about the personal experience and children, and my children as well have played a big part in my outlook and how I act, and I think it's very important. And I want to link it to a point here. Until a couple of years ago, I drove a gasoline-driven automobile, and my children, 3 of them, all wanted me to get rid of it, and so I did my research. And I got on the internet, and I had to look at if I buy an electric vehicle, is it really doing good? Because there's a lot of information out there, may I say some fake news or false information. And I did all my research and all my work, and even if the electric power comes from fossil fuels, we still save carbon when we switch to electric. And my point is taking that personal experience and then really getting involved in this effort, doing the research and understanding. I want to point out one thing, because the comment was made that infrastructure is very it's very important. Infrastructure investment is important. From an investment perspective, interest rates have never been lower. From an investment perspective, actually, in many countries around the world, there are negative interest rates where you're actually paid to borrow money. Isn't it a time, and this is my personal view, isn't it the time in terms of infrastructure to come together, government and industry, individuals and public, to finally invest in this infrastructure? We can do it now. And I know Japan has a very high debt to GDP rate, et cetera, but the return will be both financial, because we know renewables are now very good investments. We know renewables can produce per unit at a rate lower than fossil fuels. It's a great investment for the future, and it's a great investment morally. And so I just wanted to raise that. I know we have challenges around the infrastructure. We're still burning, whether it be gas or coal. There was a tragedy that occurred in Fukushima, but whether it's here or whether it's in emerging markets, we can borrow at zero. Isn't this the time to think about moving this forward? Those are the comments I wanted to make.
So if you borrow money, you get money for borrowing money. So now is the time to make investments, was the comment. So I have a question for you, Semaya-san. European companies, companies around the world, you look at different companies around the world. But what are the things that should be done in Japan? What kind of policies should Japanese government implement to accelerate decarbonization?
So I'm very simple-minded, and I really think we need a declaration by governments, not just in Japan, all the G20, that we're going net carbon neutral by 2050 or earlier. And that will create momentum. We see that cities can act and implement much quicker, but we've got to have something very simple and bold. And I heard earlier the environmental minister, it would be wonderful to have a declaration. And then we all can rally around it. I wouldn't underestimate the power of the message. We Americans love to talk about the elevator pitch. Our presentations are very simple, 3 or 4 points, and everyone can remember them and rally around them. And make it very simple. Of course, we have to build frameworks. We have so many frameworks. I can name 10 or 15 of them. That's for the experts. That's for us.
When you
Yes.
framework, what do you mean by framework? Can you elaborate a little bit?
Page 100, TCFD. I mean, there are many, 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 many. I can go on and on and on and on and on. But the average individual out there doesn't understand that. So we need a top-down and what I call a bottom-up effort. And we need to encourage both, because without the pressure to change, without the reward and I hate to say the punishment, I don't think we're going to move forward. And we have an opportunity. We need to change. The investment industry, for example, there's so many new technologies and so many new ideas to help in this effort. Those technologies require investment. But those technologies are not necessarily plant or land or building intensive. They're human capital intensive. They are IT intensive. And it's very difficult, for example, for a bank to lend to those type of companies. They're very much startup companies. We have to rethink how we lend money. They'll attract equity investment, but they're considered very high risk. We need to mainstream this. In many investment firms, in many companies, the stewardship or the environmental division is separate. We have to get from it being separate to being within all of our groups. We have to make sure it comes into all of the areas. And then we'll know we'll get to our target.
本当にいろんな
People are coming up with rules and frameworks and mechanisms. There are so many of them. And things are making progress, but to ordinary individuals, is it easy for them to understand? The answer is no. Things have become extremely confusing. So more simple, a message of targeting zero emission by 2050, a statement by G20, a statement made by the Japanese government. If there is such a message, it would be easier for people to act. So I have a question to all of you. How can we, as required by Greta and people in the young, people who are young, when they become old, can we realize a world where we do not see an increase of a large number of in terms of temperature? What should we do? And I would like to ask each one of you to answer to that question.
The children, the young generation, or the generation of our future, with such children and the future generation to work together to co-create new business, co-transform the businesses together. I think that is what we need. First of all, we need to listen. After listening and not only giving the answer or responding, we can do together, act together, together with the children, the younger generation, to engage in business together, create new value, create new business. That is what I want to do.
As a corporation, we have to have a clear mission. Which direction are you heading toward? We have to clearly show that. And at the same time, create high targets, aim at them, aim high. Does the leadership have the passion? As a top management, having passion is very important. And another point, we have to think that this is an issue that is close to and dear to our hearts, that it's relevant to all of us, the management and the employees. Can we seriously feel so and understand so? Well, for that to be felt, through these conferences and seminars, we have to communicate the facts, tell people repeatedly what is happening. That's also important.
I have a similar comment. In the case of our city, each citizen in the city need to have their own thought and act on their own. I'm changing the topic a little bit. In Shiga Prefecture, there was a major contamination of Biwa Lake. It was about 40 years ago. Back then, people living in that area decided not to use detergent having phosphorus ingredient. So if a problem is shared, people stop using detergents. So now that temperature has gone up and children are no longer able to play outside, but that is not creating actions among the people living in the city. To enable that, we need to show that there is a problem by the local government. And to do that, we need to make sure that all of the citizens are able to accept the inconvenience and connect that with actions.
Leadership comes from the top, and this may sound like a joke, but it's not. I bring my water bottle and my coffee to the office every morning. I think we all need to think about the little things. If we start with the little things, again, we'll create momentum. Last point I wanted to make. I grew up in America in the 60s and the 70s during the Cold War. In school, we were taught, and this may sound crazy, how to avoid nuclear attack. And of course, nobody wants to think of nuclear attack, and I don't think it goes that far, but we have to make sure in every chance when it comes to climate change and climate action, our children are educated. Elementary school, middle school, high school, university, so we're all on board. And again, this will create the momentum. Thank you.
JCI last year was established, and it's been a little over a year, and already over 400 non-state actors, companies, NGOs, local governments have become members of JCI. And a collective voice, if we are able to raise the voice, as Seimai, as I mentioned earlier, if we're able to raise the voice, we will be, that may lead to the Japanese government conveying the message of targeting zero emission by 2050. Lastly, last month in New York, there were words of another leader that was rather impressive. PRB, Principle for Responsible Banking. A signing ceremony was held on the 22nd of September at the United Nations. 130 financial institutions signed, which represent 1/3 of the total deposit the leaders, one after the other, including people in the management, made speeches. UNEP FI's Eric Usher was the final speaker. He is the leader of UNEP FI. And he, in the final part of his speech, he said, "What I would like to appreciate most is the first 30 financial institutions who started this movement. The 30, and I don't want to talk about the financial institutions, the organizations, but the 30 individuals." If I were to borrow his words, 30 individuals who had the courage of coming out of the weeds. He was able to put together the 30 financial institutions because he was patient. And the representative of the 30 institutions were patient, but they also had a dream, and based on that dream, they did the planning, and based on that planning, they induced players in the industry. They convinced other players and actors in the industry and talked about what is right. And because all of these 30 individuals were nuisance, they were nuisance telling the right things. And these are the kind of people that are most required, most needed in the society today. And that was what Eric Usher mentioned in his speech, which was rather impressive. So with this, I would like to conclude the top session. Thank you very much to the panelists. So I would like to ask for a big round of applause to the moderator as well as the panelists on stage.